This is Cast of Wonders, the fiction podcast for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Today we present Edward Ahearn's story, The Feathered Cloak. Ed resumed writing after 40-odd years in foreign intelligence and international sales. He has his original wife, but advises that after 46 years they're both out of warranty. Ed dissipates his free time fly fishing, shooting, and attending Japanese, German and French language groups. His proudest writing achievement is 5 new fairy tales, the protagonist of each of which has the name of one of his grandchildren. Ed's been here before. He wrote The Dun Horse, which was episode 72. You might like to go back and check it out. And now let's get straight on with it, because we've a tale to tell. The Feathered Cloak by Edward Ahearn. The trouble began when Rhys found the oak wardrobe. He stood barely 4 feet tall, but the freestanding closet was twice that high. Its hinges were beaten brass turned brown with age. The carved wood was riddled with little wormholes. Rhys had never seen a piece of furniture so big and heavy, and he knew that if it fell on him he'd be squashed. The wardrobe rested in a corner of a large, open attic. The attic was a jumble clutter of his grandfather's collection of magic equipment. His grandfather had been a professional magician who had starred in New York and Paris and even Moscow. The key to the armoire doors stuck out of the lock. It turned with a dry rasp. When Rhys opened the doors, piles of theatre costumes, tablecloths and curtains spilled out onto the floor. Their colours, once shocking bright purples and pinks, had faded over time into pastels. I'm in trouble, Rhys thought. He pulled out the rest of the clothes so he could restack them and try and shut the doors. Under the cloth, worms had eaten through one of the baseboards. Beneath the rotted board he could see the shape of a box. Rhys touched the riddled board and it broke into dusty fragments. I'm so in trouble, Rhys thought, and reached in and pulled out a yard-long wooden box. The wood was different than the wardrobe, darker and denser. Peculiar symbols were carved all over it, and on the top was written, Nunquam mutare pallium in flavo. The box was untouched by worms. Rhys looked back into the false bottom of the wardrobe. Odd, he thought, there's no latch or hinges. This was sealed into the wardrobe. I don't think my grandfather ever knew it was here. Rhys reached down and pulled off the lid. He stared again, this time at grey-brown feathers woven together. The feathers were big, bigger than seagull wing feathers, bigger even than turkey tail feathers. And when he touched the feathers, they sparked into sharp oranges and purples. Rhys dropped the feathers in shock, then bent back down and picked them up out of the box. They were a coat. No, not a coat. A cloak. As he held it, Rhys watched the feathers pulling back into themselves, shrinking until they were a size that would just wrap around him. The cloak continued to sparkle where he held it. I wonder, he thought, and swirled the cloak around himself. He was covered chin to toes. The cloak was comfortingly warm, like a snowsuit on a cold winter day. It burst into shiny black, then red, then purple. I wonder, Rhys thought, maybe green? The cloak shifted into greens, first the colour of a fall granny apple, then the shade of deep winter ocean, then the dark green of spring leaves, and lastly the green of a summer frog. And Rhys could feel the skins of apple and frog against his skin, the wet of seawater and the damp of new leaves. He tried to do other things, but the cloak didn't make him strong, or let him fly, or give him a chocolate cake. Still, the colours were brilliant and swelled Rhys' feelings, making everything more intense. He took off the cloak, put it back in the box and paused. I can't tell Mum or Dad. I'm only 9 and they'll take it away from me. I'll put it back where it was and only take it out here in the attic. The next day, after school, he clambered back up the narrow stairs into the attic. When he took out the box, he almost dropped it. There were new words carved on the box, and one of them looked like his name. Ris Caveat Flavi. Ris had no idea what the words meant and took out the cloak. It was still his size and sparkled again when he touched it. He turned the cloak sunset red and felt the dwindling warmth of a day's end. He changed to the dark blue of his eyes, and suddenly he could see past his school to the highway. And then, as he thought of the highway, he was hovering over it, staring down at passing cars from what seemed to be the height of his attic. Ris panicked and was immediately back in the attic, the cloak again a dull grey brown. I can go places, kind of. Or at least I can see them. That was blue. What else? Mustard yellow, he thought. But nothing happened. The yellow of fire! Still nothing. Ris became angry. I order you, he commanded, to change into the yellow of gold. It was perhaps his order, or perhaps his anger, but the cloak shifted into the buttery glint of gold. Ris felt the slick coldness of the metal, so pure that he knew if he could bite it, his teeth would leave marks. But something was different. Ris felt as if the gold colour reached far beyond the cloak, as if he had just let something loose that was rampaging further out than he could see. He took off the cloak and put it away. That evening his father paced back and forth excitedly. What a day I've had, Ris. The stock market is up 3% and my own investments are up 5%. We're a lot richer today than we were yesterday. Ris' father kept talking with his mother about buying things, about taking vacations, about schools for Ris. But his father didn't sound happy. He just talked about getting more things. When Ris put on the cloak the next afternoon, he wasn't his usual cheerful self. Give me the dirty yellow of a dying fire, he ordered. As he stood basking in cooling embers and ringed by ashes, he felt the sadness of things ending. This is so uncomfortable it's painful, he thought, and put the cloak away and went downstairs. Ris' mother and father called him into their bedroom the next morning. Ris, his mother said, your great-aunt Clarice died late yesterday afternoon. She's been sick for a long time, so I guess it was her time, but she's gone. And lots of other old people, his dad said. It's like someone had ordered them to finish their life. Very strange. That day at school, Ris said almost nothing. He felt like he'd gotten lost in the woods or had done something really bad that no one knew about. As he walked from the bus stop to his home, he noticed a woman standing on the sidewalk in front of his house. She was very old, but somehow still beautiful. Strawberry-coloured hair half covered with a babushka, clothed neck to wrist and ankles in soft brown and green. Ris blinked and she was standing next to him. Ris, stop. You and I must speak. Her voice had the gentle echoes of wind. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. I was called Yord. You're tied more closely to me than you know, and know me much less than you should. But you're still a stranger. What sign would you need? Look closely at this picket on your wooden fence. Do you know what tree wood it is under the white paint? No? It's a spruce that grew in Canada. Yord touched the wooden slat. Look at it now. As Ris stared at the picket, it sprouted, with no noise or fuss, a green needled sprig. Wow, Ris exclaimed. Okay, I'll listen. You found the cloak. Don't bother to deny it. The cloak has adopted you, even though you're dangerously ignorant of its powers and dangers. Why didn't you obey the warnings? Ris was puzzled. Warnings? Oh, you mean the symbols on the box? I don't understand them. Yord sighed. Time turns wisdom into error. When the words were carved, Latin was the common language of the world, known to millions of people. Now it's dead to all but a few scholars. You can transform the cloak into any colour you wish, and learn how each colour heals, how the colours blend, and how you can reach outside yourself. But never, never again change the cloak into yellow, flavum. The shades of that colour are used only for evil. But what if I think of a yellow colour? I can't stop thinking. You can think all you like without harm. Just never command the cloak into yellow. Not straw, not pus, not gold, not sand, not amber. The old woman was frightening Rhys. Could we just burn the cloak? Little one, the cloak feathers were taken from the ashes of a bird that never dies. They can't be destroyed by fire. And you're its guardian now. Deep down you already know that you want to keep it. Yord touched 2 fingers to Rhys' forehead. They felt mountain firm. She kept them pressed against his head while she talked. Your actions have awakened another who will come to take the cloak from you. He must not get it. He'll lie and try and cheat you out of the cloak, and if that doesn't work, will try to kill you. Never ever agree to his entering your house. Here is knowledge of the cloak, which I hope protects you. Images poured like a waterfall over Yord's 2 fingers into Rhys' head. He saw the strength of green, the stability of brown, the mingling and stripping of 1,000 colours. Rhys staggered when Yord broke the contact. I must be elsewhere and everywhere, Rhys, and can't stay. You must behave like your namesake. Huh? Yord sighed again. The things parents don't tell you can hurt you. Both you and your name are Welsh. Rhys means ardour and enthusiasm. It's the opposite of what the other stands for. That's your birthright. Use it to counter the evil coming at you. Yord walked away without another word. For several afternoons Rhys went through rainbows of colours, exploring what he could see and do. He discovered that if he wished for no colour at all, the cloak became invisible, and Rhys just looked like he was wearing his ordinary clothes. On the 5th day, a man came to Rhys' school. His jacket was the colour of bug guts, the yellow of a rotten peach. He talked with Rhys' teacher, Mrs. Burton, who asked Rhys to come out of the class with her. Rhys, she nodded, this is Mr. Flavis. When the man smiled, Rhys could see yellowed teeth. Mr. Flavis has apparently lost something and thinks that you know where it is. Rhys felt himself trembling, but his voice stayed firm. Mrs. Burton, I don't know Mr. Flavis. What's he lost? What have you lost, Mr. Flavis, and where? From her tone, Rhys knew that Mrs. Burton didn't much like Mr. Flavis. I'd rather not say, but it's precious to me, and I think that Rhys knows where it is. Don't you, boy? No, sir, I do not, and I don't know you. Can I go back in now, Mrs. Burton? Yes, Rhys, you may. Mr. Flavis, this all seems very irregular. Unless you have something more specific, I'm afraid you'll have to leave the school. The man looked at Rhys like he wanted to rip out his throat, but smiled enough to show his yellow teeth again. I'll keep looking, won't I, Rhys? When Rhys came home from school that afternoon, Mr. Flavis was sitting in the living room with Rhys' mother and father. But I didn't invite him in, Rhys thought. Rhys, this is Mr. Flavis. He seems to think that you've found something of his. His mother and father looked strained, as if they regretted letting Mr. Flavis in. But Mr. Flavis had the look of a dog about to tear apart meat. Thank you, Mrs. Cardiff, for letting me in. Rhys, would you invite me in as well? No, never. Get out of our house. Rhys, his father barked. Manners, please. Apologise to Mr. Flavis. Never. By that which I have worn, I order you to leave. Never enter again. Flavis jumped up from the sofa and began cursing. At least it sounded like cursing. Rhys didn't understand the words. As he hissed at Rhys, yellow spittle sprayed from his mouth. Little toad, I will be upon you when you least expect it. And he backed from the house, glaring at Rhys and hissing curses. Rhys' mother and father called the police, and everyone questioned him about Mr. Flavis. But he just kept repeating that no, he didn't know Mr. Flavis, and no, he didn't have anything that Mr. Flavis owned. I'm not really lying, he thought. I don't know Mr. Flavis, and I do know that he has no claim to the cloak. The police drove by Rhys' house several times a day, but after 2 weeks his parents and the police forgot about the episode. Not Rhys. He knew that Mr. Flavis was waiting for his chance to pounce. Yord's lore surged like tide within him. It's pushing at me to be understood and used, Rhys thought. Every afternoon he scooped mind water from Yord's knowledge and practiced a new skill with the cloak. Flavis is ready to hurt me as soon as I'm alone. I only have one chance to protect both me and the cloak. On the day when there was no more of Yord's knowledge to absorb, Rhys got off his bus one stop early, waved goodbye to his friends, and started walking alone toward home. Flavis was on him before the first minute had ticked by. Flavis was dressed in his long coat the colour of rotten peaches. "You can't run from me, you little brat." "I'm not going to." "First I'm going to reach in and rip apart your puny little mind. I'll order you to bring me the cloak. After that I'm going to use this," Flavis pulled out a bronze dagger, "and slice you open from navel to neck." Rhys had never been so scared, but he knew what he had to do. "There's no need to send me for the cloak. I have it on." And Rhys changed the colour of the cloak he was wearing from invisible nothing to purple, dark, brooding, royal purple. Flavis stumbled back a step, but then jumped forward again. "All the quicker to cut you open." "Flavis, go away now without the cloak. You'll be disappointed, but still be who you are. If you attack me, you'll be changed into something you hate and still won't have the cloak. Please, go away." Flavis' coat swirled with ugly yellows, the colours of old bruises and pond scum and dead fish bellies. Gnarled yellow fingers sprouted from the coat and grabbed at Rhys. As Rhys jumped back, he flung jagged spouts of purple at Flavis, spouts that twisted and squeezed the yellow fingers. Flavis screamed in pain. The purple pounded like waves over him, frothing and hiding Flavis from view. When it ebbed away, the man who stood there was dressed in dull brown. "What have you done to me?" he wailed. "What am I?" "You're an empty husk now, Mr. Flavis. Yellow and purple are contrary colours. When I merged them, they created a special brown. Drab, powerless brown. You're of no harm to anyone but yourself now. Walk away." Rhys never saw Mr. Flavis again. One day, using the blue of his eyes, he was skimming at treetop through a forest of oaks and maples. Below, in a clearing next to a huge oak, he saw an old woman with red hair dressed in green and dark brown. Just as Rhys recognised her, she looked up and smiled. "My little Rhys," she thought, "you protected the cloak well. Don't become so involved with it that you lose track of yourself." "Yord, thank you for your help. I wouldn't be alive without you. But I have to ask, why of all the colours is yellow bad?" "Yellow has wonderful shades, little one, and once was as the other colours. But it was used for horrible purpose, and those who do horrible things have used it since. Now fly on over my forest, Feather Steward, for I must be elsewhere and everywhere, and only paused to wish you well." And so ends The Feathered Cloak. Cast of Wonders is a production of Wolfsbane Publishing. The editor is Marguerite Kenner. The host and audio producer is Graham Dunlop. Artwork is by Barry J. Northern. It's released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it, but don't change or sell it. Theme is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com.